Hello viewers, today we'll discuss a topic titled Annabel Lee, a poem written by Edgar Allan Poe. It is a beautiful, painful memory of Poe about his wife. Now let us know something about Edgar Allan Poe. He is one of the most celebrated American authors of the 19th century. Poe was one of the leading exponents of Romanticism, and his work might be regarded as a part of the great tradition established by renowned poets such as Lord Byron, John Keats, Shelley, Coleridge, and Scott, and the German writers who made a deep impression upon the early 19th century literature. Poe's major contribution to the theoretical criticism of poetry was the Poetic Principle, which was written towards the very end of his life. Most of his poems, Poe deals with the ending of things and melancholy associated with loss and bereavement. His most memorable works were published shortly before his death in 1849. One of Poe's most indelible works is the poem Annabel Lee, which was written shortly before his death. Its subject is one which naturally appeals to every man who loves his wife. The poem celebrates conjugal love. On one side, the poem glorifies the connubial bliss, and on the other, it is a lament on the premature death of a dearly loved wife. In its entirety, the poem encompasses several aspects which set it apart from the rest of his works. He wrote Annabel Lee in the month of May in 1849, a few months before his death, and it first appeared in the Southern Literary Messenger posthumously in November 1849. Although the poem may refer to a number of women in Poe's life, most acknowledge it to be in the memory of Virginia Clem, Poe's wife, who married him at the age of 13 and who died in 1847 before she turned 25. Now let us learn some objectives of this poem. First and foremost, we need to study the universal appeal of the word called dark romanticism in American poetry, and this with a special reference to the poem Annabel Lee written by Poe. The second objective is to analyze the suitability of the title of the work. And the third objective is to study the poem for its critical analysis. Let us now have a brief idea about what this poem, the summary, has all about. Annabel Lee is a beautiful, painful memory. It is autobiographical in nature and celebrates the love which existed between Poe and his wife called Virginia. The speaker of the poem is remembering his long-lost love called Annabel Lee. The speaker knew Annabel Lee many years ago when she was a young girl. They both lived in a kingdom by the sea. Even though they were only children, these two were really seriously in love. So in love that even the angels in heaven noticed that they were jealous. Apparently, a wind came down from the clouds which made Annabel Lee sick and then eventually killed her. When this happened, her relatives came and took her away from the speaker and shut her up in a tomb. The poem Annabel Lee is based on the theme of eternal love. In this poem, the narrator portrays his love towards Annabel Lee by means of the use of the dramatic use of nostalgia. In the line, "For we loved with a love that was more than love," the narrator says that the bonds of their love were so strong that they cannot be affected by anything. This kind of love is hardly seen, and the central idea of the poem is based on their pure love, their experiences, and their sufferings. It was many and many a year ago, in a kingdom by the sea, that a maiden there lived whom you may know by the name of Annabel Lee. And this maiden, she lived with no other thought than to love and be loved by me. I was a child and she was a child in this kingdom by the sea. But we love with a love that was more than love, I and my Annabel Lee. With a love that the winged seraphs of heaven coveted her and me. And this was the reason that long ago, in this kingdom by the sea, a wind blew out of a cloud, chilling my beautiful Annabel Lee, so that her high-born kinsman came and bore her away from me, to shut her up in a sepulchre in this kingdom by the sea. The angels, not half so happy in heaven, went envying her and me. Yes, that was the reason, as all men know, in this kingdom by the sea, that the wind came out of the cloud by night, chilling and killing my Annabel Lee. But our love, it was stronger by far than love of those who were older than we, of many far wiser than we. And neither the angels in heaven above, nor the demons down under the sea, can ever dissever my soul from the soul of the beautiful Annabel Lee. For the moon never beams without bringing me dreams of the beautiful Annabel Lee. And the stars never rise, but I feel the bright eyes of the beautiful Annabel Lee. And so, all the night tide, I lie down by the side of my darling, my life and my bride. In the sepulchre there by the sea, in her tomb by the sounding sea. That this piece called Annabel Lee, which is a very significant piece of American poetry, which was published in the year 1849. Before knowing more about this, let us get to know the importance of dark romanticism. American literature would not have been the same as what it is today without romanticism, transcendentalism, and dark romanticism. In fact, even the works of Edgar Allan Poe. It is because of their input that American literature has become what it is today. In the late 18th century, writers were beginning to turn away from reason and straight facts as a means of discovering truth. With the birth of Romanticism came the birth of new ideals. Romanticism brought the idea that intuition and imagination, emotion, were far more important and worth than the intellectual and rational approach or thought. To define Romanticism, we can say it is a revolt against rationalism that affected literature and other forms of art. The late 18th century and the most of the 19th century, we get to see how this continued for a long time, the era of dark romanticism. The Romantic movement was one which began in Germany and moved through the whole of Europe and Russia. And it almost simultaneously changed the very course of American literature. Among England's great Romantic writers were William Wordsworth, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, John Keats, Lord Byron, Percy Shelley, and Sir Walter Scott. Another group that further influenced American literature were the Dark Romantics. The Dark Romantic writers, who were the contemporaries of Poe and Hawthorne, were Herman Melville, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, and Henry Longfellow. These Dark Romantic writers emphasized the supernatural, the grotesque, the gloomy, and the morbid. Unlike the Romantics, the Dark Romantics acknowledge the evil of man and the horror of evil. These writers used the emotions of good as well as evil. These poets tried to probe into the mysterious, darker, and unknown side of human mind, body, and soul. Among the three major poets from the Dark Romantics we could talk about were Edgar Allan Poe, Herman Melville, and Nathaniel Hawthorne. Their ideas developed from both mystical and melancholy aspect of Puritan thought. Though they were considered as anti-transcendentalist, theirs was an imaginative vision which was essentially romantic, in that it stressed intuition, powers of nature, and individuals' emotion. Edgar Allan Poe is perhaps the best known American romantic who worked in the so-called Gothic mode. His poems and stories explore the darker side of the romantic imagination, dealing with the grotesque, the supernatural, and the horrifying. Poe also rejected the rational and the intellectual and was in favor of the intuitive and emotional, which were dominant characteristics of the Romantic movement. Hence, in his critical theories and through his art, Poe emphasized that the didactic and intellectual elements had no place in art. The subject matter of art should rather deal with emotions, and the greatest art was that which had direct effect on the emotions. The poem called The Raven brought such a fame to Poe. Poe has written many works and has explored many issues which have been brought up by the Dark Romantics. During his times and still today, Poe is regarded for his dark and emotional style of writing. This alone connected Poe with Romanticism's emotional aspect. Also, we find Poe's inclination towards magical and mysterious writings, which also are traits of Romanticism. Annabel Lee is one of Poe's best known poems. It almost ranks with the other poems by Poe, such as The Raven and To Helen. Annabel Lee is an imaginary name which in this poem Poe gives to his dead wife, whose real name was Virginia. This poem commemorates Poe's love for Virginia, who died in 1847. Poe had married Virginia in 1836 when she was just a little over 13 years old, though he himself was 27. This was a strange marriage indeed, and it excited much comment. The marriage doomed to have a tragic end in 1842. Virginia fell seriously ill. Her illness continued and in fact went on becoming worse and worse. In 1846, her condition became critical, which eventually led to her death. Her death took place in the year 1847, which was one of the several misfortunes which befell Poe in the course of his life, which itself had a premature end in the year 1849. The poem Annabel Lee that Poe wrote after his wife died, which expressed his thoughts and emotions on her death, reflected many of his writing styles that also connect to the Romanticism. In the poem, Poe says that he and his wife loved each other so deeply that they aroused the envy of the angels who brought about his beloved's death prematurely. The object of the angels was to put an end to the love which had made them jealous. But Poe declares emphatically that neither the angels nor the demons can separate the beloved soul from him. He says that he now sleeps every night by the side of his beloved Annabel Lee, who lies buried in a tomb close to the sea. Throughout the poem, the name Annabel Lee is an important part of the rhyme scheme. In every stanza, we find the name Annabel Lee is mentioned more than once. Reiteration such as this could be for two purposes. One could be for the sake of rhyme, and the other could be to emphasize the importance of her name, which is associated with the strong feelings or the tremendous feelings of the speaker's solitude or loneliness. Annabel Lee is a work that expresses great loss and sadness. The speaker laments that he has lost the one true love of his life. The loneliness and the sadness that permeate the lines of the poem result in an obsession of sorts and over the love the two shared. Every thought and all the dreams he has, everything has to do with this love which was lost. In modern day thought, such an obsession that results in the speaker going to the grave and lay by her side could be viewed as a form of necrophilism or morbidity. But in the traditional vein of the Gothic and the Romantic fiction or poetry, such behavior could be considered as a sign of ardor to one's true love. An important aspect of Poe's style is the use of images. Whenever the moon begins to shine, Poe dreams of the beautiful Annabel Lee. Whenever the stars appear in the sky, he sees in them the beautiful and bright eyes of his beloved Annabel Lee. This imagery is shared by many of Poe's poems and stories. His main characters are often haunted by dreams and visions of the women that they loved. Most of the time, those women were dead but not gone. Now let us proceed with the further explanation of the poem. This poem consists in all 6 stanzas. In the first stanza, the speaker tells that both he and Annabel Lee were young when this happened. The poem is written with words and a voice which sounds medieval like a fairy tale. The poem, for instance, has the introduction setting with a kingdom by the sea. This gives the poem a mysterious and magical sense which Poe and Romanticism are known for. This sense is also accompanied by the romantic idea of isolation in nature and being uninfluenced by society. By using the winged seraphs of heaven in the poem, Poe also refers to the strongest and the undying and unconditional love for his wife. Then, still without saying that his beloved was dead, the speaker tells how her kinsman came and took her away from him. He calls the kinsman a highborn, which means aristocratic and noble. One can feel the speaker's intense pain at losing Annabel, as he feels she's been stolen away from him. Death and Annabel's family are trying really hard to separate these two lovers apart, and trying also to shut her up in her tomb. He repeats what he said in line 13, insisting that that was the reason why the wind came down and killed Annabel Lee. Even if death might seem the end of love, our speaker or our poet tells that it isn't the case for him and his beloved Annabel Lee. Even though they were young, they did not stop them from loving completely and from knowing what they wanted. He goes on to say, neither the angels in heaven nor the demons who live under water can stop their love. Nothing in heaven nor in hell can dissever his soul and Annabel's soul. The speaker seems increasingly obsessed and unbalanced as the poem goes on. And this is why, says Poe, he sleeps by the side of his darling wife, who lies buried in a tomb close to the sounding sea. He is half alive and half dead, sleeping in a tomb by the ocean. We find in the 5th and the 6th stanza of the poem that Poe definitely uses some romantic and poetic metaphors and superlatives that describe his love for her even after her death, and how he thinks of her at almost every single moment of the day. We move on to further analyze this poem as we check on the last couplet of the poem, where Poe starts with a poetic description of his wife's state in her sepulchre there by the sea, but then he translates his poetic diction into plain terms with in her tomb by the sea. Repetition is used here to augment her state of being. It is also used for Poe to translate the poetic diction of the first line to simpler terms in the second line. Another striking feature of this poem is about the intensity of emotion. The intensity finds expression especially in the lines in which Poe says that his love for Annabel Lee and her love for him were of an exceptional quality. The expressions of his love becomes even more intense when Poe declares that neither the angels nor the demons can bring about the separation between these two lovers. The poem becomes even more fanciful when Poe says that the moonrise brings to him the dreams of the beautiful Annabel Lee, and in the rising of stars he sees the bright eyes of his beloved, the beautiful Annabel Lee. The poem closes with a pretty conceit, with Poe claiming that every night he sleeps by the side of his darling wife or his beloved who lies buried in a tomb close to the sea. However, the grief of the bereaved lover is greatly soothed by the conviction that neither the angels nor the demons in the hell ever can separate his soul from the soul of the beautiful Annabel Lee. The grief is undoubtedly intense, but the lover's confidence about the unbreakable bond of love between him and his beloved is like a ray of bright light in the darkness. The poem can be considered to be a charming lyric because of its lucidity and sincerity. When we try to come up with a further analysis of this poem, we find that traditionally most poems are stanzaic. The poem Annabel Lee is written in 6 stanzas. Each stanza is composed of 6 to 8 lines. Each line, or rather each stanza, seem to alternate. Part of the reason for this sort of alternation of lines may be due to the aspect of rhythm and rhyming. One aspect that makes this poem different from the rest of the works in prose is the element of rhythm. The rhythm of Annabel Lee is fairly fast-paced. In the opening lines, the language flows in such a way that the rhythm is established with the syntax alone. The rhythm is maintained throughout the poem by the repetition of the name Annabel Lee. Throughout the poem, the name Annabel Lee is an important part of the rhyme scheme. With every stanza, we find Annabel Lee is mentioned more than once. This is a reiteration used for the sake of rhyme, for the sake of emphasis. The emphasized aspect is the importance of the name of Annabel Lee, which is associated with the speaker's loneliness. Annabel Lee has a peaceful musical rhythm which reflects the overall musicality of the poem, which makes a heavy use of the refrain phrases in this kingdom by the sea and of the beautiful Annabel Lee. It also makes use of the repetition of other words. In particular, although the poem stanzas have somewhat an irregular length and structure, the rhyme scheme continuously emphasizes 3 words, which are me, Lee, and the sea, enforcing the linked nature of these concepts within the poem while giving the poem a strong and a song-like cadence. Now let us move on to the aspect of Gothic elements. The poem's settings has several Gothic elements, as the kingdom by the sea is lonely, an undefined but mysterious location. Poe does not describe the setting with any specificity, and he weaves a hazy, romantic atmosphere around the kingdom until he ends by offering the stark and the horrific image of a tomb there by the sea. The location by the sea recalls the city in the sea, which is also located by the sea and which is conceptually connected to the death and decay. At the same time, the nostalgic tone and the Gothic background serve to inculcate the image of the love that outlasts all oppositions, from the spiritual jealousy of the angels and the physical barriers of death. Although Annabel Lee has died, the narrator can still see her bright, beautiful eyes, an image of her soul, and the spark of her life that gives a promise of a future meeting between the 2 lovers. The speaker wants what he is feeling to be known, if not felt. Rather, he wants his feelings to be known, if not at least felt, by those who read his words. On the surface, this poem may appear to be more of a depressed and obsessive expression of emotions. But when we look at the underlying themes and thoughts, we find that the lines and the words themselves are put together. Strong words such as kingdom, sepulchre, and heaven demonstrate the depth which the speaker is trying to convey. Usually such words are thought of in an ethereal context which would embody more than the mortal or earthly understanding. This reference may have been a deliberate attempt on part of the Poe to show the spiritual impact that was experienced by the speaker. Poe's writing styles are unique. They have brought many ideas to the modern literature and symbolized the birth of Romanticism in the United States. Romanticism brought new ideas and the perception that intuition, imagination, and emotion were equally important to the scientific and factual thought. Poe's style shows a side of mysterious and Gothic writing. They show not only what a person is feeling but also what they are thinking. Romanticism was a time period of many changes and had a lasting effects on American literature. Examples of Poe's use of mysterious writings and the tactic of using vagueness and the lack of detail, especially concerning time and space. This could have been done by Poe in order to arouse the curiosity of the readers. He intended to keep the readers guessing and asking questions which keeps them reading. This poem represents the very essence of lyricism. Its deeply personal quality, its spontaneity, simplicity, sincerity, and its melancholy make it one of the most celebrated poems in American literature. Pathos is a prevailing atmosphere of the poem which goes straight to our hearts as we read through it. Poe relates to a very emotional and dark tale to his audience through the use of stanzas and verse. By comparison, the overall effect that this work has had on many generations of readers may have been altered in some way if Poe had chosen to write this tale in prose. All these components add to the mystic and power of Poe's tale of Annabel Lee. These various aspects show the variance from prose this work demonstrates and the importance of such differences. It has been a real pleasure to discuss a beautiful topic called Annabel Lee by Edgar Allan Poe. Thank you very much. We'll shortly meet for our next class. Thank you.